Hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers for the honor of also including me in the plenary panel when I sent the abstract. I was just hoping to be at one of the parallel sessions at a tiny room somewhere with 10 friends and a colleague. But this is very nice. So, and also the fact that I'm following up from Emilia and Lassa makes this so much easier for me. When I heard that I only have 15 minutes, I was like, oh shit, I thought I had 20 minutes. Now I can skip through some of the slides rather quickly. So I'm basically investigating one of the aspects already investigated by Lasse, but I'm focusing more on other scholars. Namely, I'm focusing more on the so-called ideational tradition of populist studies as initiated by the Dutch scholar Cas Mulder. And I'm focusing a bit more on the role of constructing the people in populism. And this is a very, very old story. And I have here a quote from Isaiah Berlin, who is referring to the very first major conference on populism from LSE in 1967. So if you look at the proceedings, they ended up concluding that, look, this is so chaotic that there is no definition, there is nothing. We agreed that we disagree about what populism is. Some of us think that is something equivalent to socialism. It's very progressive. Others say that it's basically fascism. Others say that it's a kind of politics of the folklore or notions of the popular, whatever. But the thing on which they agreed very early on is the centrality of the people. Populism is all about constructing the people, and this is one of the first takes on this. So the people, there are going to be variations of how the people is going to be constructed, but they're usually the ones left out, the have-nots, the discontented, and so on and so forth. And also, nowadays it's very fashionable to talk about minimal definitions of populism. And actually, some of us, me, Yannis, people working a lot around the Populism project, we have taken on some of the merits of this approach, and we agree that articulating minimal criteria is good. But when you look back at the classic definitions of populism, so Canavan, Laclau, 70s, 80s, there was already a minimal conception of populism there. But very recently, with a big breakthrough of populist studies, we have a new generation of populism, definitions of populism, especially starting with mood. And you see all these kind of new elements popping up. So these are supposedly the definitions that are truly minimal, and they are remedying several of the problems of previous definition. And also there's the argument that, look, Laclau is good, but he's too abstract, he's too complex. Let's articulate a minimal definition that grasps the very core, the lowest common denominator of populism. And you see, I have underlined, so Mulder, his seminal paper in 2004, which is brilliant, I agree, but there are two, he suggests that there are two specific qualities about the people. The people of populism is homogeneous and pure, and the opponent of the people, the enemy of the people, the elite, is necessarily corrupt. And we see how other scholars operating within the same paradigm have articulated their own definition. So Kirk Hawkins makes it really, really all about morality. Populism is a battle of good versus evil. And we see how Daniel Albertrazzi and Duncan MacDonald, two other important scholars working within this paradigm, also have taken up the virtuous, homogeneous people, and so on, against the elite. So, more recently, in the handbook, the Oxford Handbook of Populism, where Mulder is contributing with a very programmatic chapter on the ideational approach, morality becomes even more important, becomes the essence of the populist division. So the essence of the people is their purity. And when Mulder talks about purity, he talks about the people as being virtuous, morally superior to the elite, and so on and so forth, and still homogeneous. So if you look at the broader field of populist studies nowadays, and there are numerous empirical studies, we tend to take it for granted that this is how things are, homogeneity, purity, moral division is the essence of populism, and so on and so forth. But I think that this is very problematic. So first of all, what does it mean that the people is homogeneous? Talking about homogeneity is basically talking about sameness, that the people is one and the same, there is no difference, no heterogeneity, there is no divergences among the people, no particularities, and so on and so forth. I argue that such homogeneity is actually rather impossible to articulate. We can only find it in very organic conceptions of the people, for example, in biological, ethno-national conceptions of the people, as we see, for example, in Nazism. Second one, what does it mean to be morally pure? So the criterion, the element of morality by itself, I think it's first very difficult to pin down. So is there a politics proper that is free from morality? Is there a way to talk about the people or about anything in politics without somehow framing it also in moral terms, especially in democratic times? If you have a political cause, don't you think that this is actually for the good of society and not for the bad? Is there a way to understand politics as only an interplay between different rationalities and interests, somehow neutrally calculated? Another question is, are there no other, if this is the only way to construct the people as morally superior and homogeneous, a question I ask is, are there other ways to construct the people? So if not, why can't we think of other ways of constructing the people? If yes, why are we only focusing on those two levels and not on other ways of constructing the populist people? And the reason why I think that this really matters is that because in this kind of tradition, and Miller is within this tradition, but he's also very critical. He's even more normative on this side. He's being critical of Mude because Mude suggests that populism can be both a threat and a corrective to democracy. Miller says, no, it's only anti-democratic because it's illiberal or anti-liberal, and democracy without liberalism doesn't make sense. So for me, the danger here is going back to Mude, of identifying basically liberalism with pluralism, from then jumping to the conclusion that populism is illiberal, hence potentially harmful, threatening, and so on and so forth. So two provisional remarks here before I jump to some empirical observations is that this is predetermining too much about our units of analysis. Instead of asking how are the people of populism constituted, we already start with the assumption that we know how they are constituted and we are going to research them. And this leads to some very paradoxical studies where you see scholars, for example, using this definition and then studying populist movements with very heterogeneous popular subjects. So I suggest that this is not, first of all, if we put aside all the theoretical and ontological problems of this conception of the people, jumping on to empirical analysis, suggests that wherever we look at, this is not our experience of populist politics. And we can start looking at it by looking at populist social movements. And I have intentionally chosen movements that also Mude and Kalvasser refer to as populist social movements. So when we look at recent instances of populist movements, starting from the piqueteros in Argentina to the indignados in the European periphery or to the Occupy Wall Street in the United States, what we see is basically big group masses of heterogeneous groups and individuals that are, what is characterizing them is that they are demanding and mobilizing against some form of power that has become alienated or not representative. Hence, the slogan that you do not represent us, all of them must go, and so on and so forth. So the primary reasons that all of them must go is exactly because they no longer represent us. They no longer act for the best of our interest. It's not because they are bad and we are good. So moving on, and it's not only that, of course. Moving on, where we studied Indignados in Greece and Spain and Occupy Wall Street, and if some of you were yesterday at the panel where Alexandros Kypiolis presented a paper about Populist 2.0, you already know. So these movements, what they stressed were exactly diversity and heterogeneity. And what they stressed was a sense of unity in revolt, some sense of unity in action. So, for example, if you look at the manifesto of the Square of the Puerta del Sol, they stress that the power of the movement is the fact that we are many and we are different. So we're not one and the same. We're not just more and pure. Similarly, if you look at the Greek case of the Aganaktismeni, the equivalent to Indignados, what you'll see there is it's a bit more complicated because the movement was split. A part of it was a bit more right-wing, so the people as nation against the Troika, against the Germans, and so on and so forth. But the other half of the movement had some more of leftist, anarchist influences, and what they stressed was a global people. So they protested with flags from countries where the IMF had implemented austerity politics, flags from other European countries that were in deep problems with austerity and so on and so forth. And what they tried to represent was a transnational people, a global people, against neoliberal elites, both local and international. And lastly, if you look at populist movements in Latin America, from the Piqueteros to Caracaso, all the recent movements associated to the pink tide, this is a whole other story. I won't get into much detail here. I only need to mention the notion of the plurinational people, for example, that we find in Bolivia. So, moving on from movements, and you have to excuse me, to political actors. So the most obvious example here is looking at populist actors of the left. And what we see here is a notion of the people as the marginalized, the underdog, the people that are suffering against austerity. And to a large extent, some of those parties were a continuation of the Indignados movement. I think that there's a sound. It's my voice, maybe. Doesn't like it. So, what is defining the notion of the people in this case are basically socioeconomic divisions. It's basically socioeconomic and ideological political divides that we find at the very heart of the populist divisions that we see, for example, in Syriza, in Podemos, and so on. So I'm gonna skip through those rather quickly. So Syriza's project was basically and quite explicitly to unify the people, and they kept stressing that the people is heterogeneous and we need to articulate very different groups and demands together. And this is how in practice change of equivalence manifests. So groups, several groups that are different with each other, but they have a common enemy, they have a common interest, they have common aspirations, and this is how they are brought together. They're not brought together in homogeneity, but in some sort of horizontal connection, some sort of unity due to this, what we can call, what Arditi calls surplus meaning, while he is interpreting Laclau's change of equivalence. When we look at Podemos, it's also very, very interesting to see that they prefer to talk about popular and citizenry unity. They prefer gente and ciudadanía, the citizenry. And if you look, for example, at Erechon, when who was until recently the key strategist of the party, when he says why we prefer those terms instead of pueblo, he explicitly says that pueblo refers to a homogeneous will that doesn't need parties to represent it, and it reminds us of Franco. So we don't prefer it because we don't understand as the people as homogeneous. I'm not going to go through the example about moral purity. You can ask me during the question, because in this case, I have a very good example from Greece. The people is not even morally pure, better than the elites. They have their own vices, and these are acknowledged and they are explained due to their subordinate position to the alienated elite. I'm going to skip you can get the picture. Heterogeneity in Bernie Sanders' campaign. So the people as an assemble of different races, ethnicities, nationalities, religions, sexualities, whatever. I sometimes get, when I present this kind of example, the argument, yeah, but are you trying to say that the populist left is good because it's pluralist and so on and so forth? What about the populist right? And I want to make maybe a bit provocative claim here that even if we look at the populist radical right, you never get a totally homogeneous people. So, for example, when you look at Marine Le Pen's latest campaign with the slogan "J'ai besoin de Marine," so I need Marine, she has this spot with 10, 11 different people from different groups. So, workers, pensioners, young people, athletes, farmers, whatever. And they all have their own everyday problems, and they all need Marine. So the people is still overwhelmingly white. They are all French nationals and so on and so forth. But there's still some heterogeneity even there. And you get this with a very, very creepy video of the Sweden Democratic Youth. Salute to the European youth from Sweden, where the youth of the Sweden Democrats did this video addressing the rest of Europe and presenting a picture of the European people as being threatened by, invading immigrants, refugees, and so on and so forth. But there was still an element, for example, of linguistic heterogeneity. They spoke in 4 or 5 different languages in this video. So still never fully homogeneous. And I'm almost there. I think I'm now getting a bit over time. So about moral purity and virtue, please Google, go to YouTube and Google Pepe Grillo celebrating Trump. So when Trump was elected, Pepe Grillo made one of his improvised videos, and he described himself and the people of the 5-star movement as the barbarians and misfits that are going to change the world. So talking about the people as the barbarians, as misfits, it's not really talking about the people and how good and virtuous and better than the elite they are. It's quite different. And I think that this is very important, but it creates issues about validity and applicability of the definition. The most important bit maybe is the normative implications already implied. So populism as monist, thus illiberal, thus threat, excluding other possibilities. And also, quite crucially, and I'll close here, is demonizing moral framings, implying that there is a politics proper free of morality. Can we imagine any kind of politics that is free of moral framings? And if we can imagine it, is it actually good for democracy, or is it maybe dangerous? And I'll start here. You can follow up on questions. Thank you.